Margaret Atkins, and I am the regent of the Judith Randolph Longwood Chapter, DAR, Daughters of the American Revolution, here in Farmville. Before we get into details, I want to give you a little bit of background information, why we're searching for the French soldiers. And I want to let you know, give you some context, I want to let you know a brief history about the DAR, who we are, and what we do. The National Society, Daughters of the American Revolution, was founded by 4 women in October of 1890 in Washington, D.C. The Society's main objectives are historic preservation, which is to perpetuate the memory and the spirit of the men and women who achieved American independence, education, in order to promote the development of an enlightened public opinion, and patriotism, to foster patriotic citizenship. With these goals in mind, our Judith Randolph chapter was organized in Farmville in October of 1925, almost 100 years ago, with Kate Elliott Wall as our first regent. Soon after our founding, the ladies of our chapter were on a mission to honor those who helped America achieve our independence. Among those people were the French soldiers who fought with us. They honored every Revolutionary War soldier they could find in their area by placing a marker on their graves, which included the French soldiers' graves in Kingsville. Now, having told you that, this is Yvonne Costello, who is our first vice regent, and she's going to give you some of the details.
Well, let me let you look at the French soldiers through the eyes of the DAR and what they were saying back in 1929. But I'll tell you how Margaret and I got to do this. About 5 years ago, we were at a DAR meeting in the house of our late regent, Dr. Wells. And she gave us a handout, kind of like this, that had, these are some significant things that have happened in 1929. So we all kind of looked at it, and then this is what grabbed our attention. Local heroes, this is from May 30th. Local heroes were also honored in a celebration on May 30th, 1929 at Kingsville to honor the memory of approximately 40 Revolutionary War soldiers who were buried there. The French ambassador at Washington was invited to attend, be present at this time. Although unable to attend, he wrote a note of appreciation honoring his countrymen. So a couple things to think there. Where is that invitation? We've been looking all over for that. But also that these women feel so honored to be able to do this. So after the meeting, Margaret and I, 5 years ago, looked at each other and said, what in the world is that all about? Where are these French soldiers? So first I called Kay Whitfield. She told me to talk to Mr. Polston, whom I had not met, and gave a lot of other names of people who have been looking at this for a long time. We've worked as hard as we can, but as of today, we have to hand it over to Jimmy. Because all of our leads, we just don't have the money, really, to do it properly. But I'm just going to tell you what the DAR was seeing. May 27, 1927. This is from the scrapbook of Regent Claire Bugg. She wrote about getting these people together, as kids, locals from Farmville, having them dress up in a French costume and proceed down a road. We think we know where the road is, into this area where they're going to have their annual Memorial Day. That's what the chapter did every Memorial Day. She writes what kinds of trees were there. They were long needle pine. Some other lady had written, they're behind Esso. She told told us about the road, and we have been down there trying to look at it, and maybe we were there, and we don't know. In 1928, Regent Mrs. James Granger, she reported, in regard to the decoration of the graves of the French soldiers buried in Keysville, these soldiers served under Lafayette in the Continental Army. A simple ceremony of decoration needs to take place. Everybody must attend. Richmond Times in 1928, a movement to mark the graves of the French soldiers and General Rochambeau's are buried in Keysville, Virginia. It caused Secretary Davis to ask the Quartermaster General of the Army to consider this proposal. The investigation has failed to reveal any record of the War Department as the names of the allies of the Americans interred at Kingsville, but it felt that their graves should be marked in some final way. This is my favorite. 1928 or 1929, Dr. J.D. Eccleston of Hampden, Sydney, wrote the most patriotic, stirring thing, and Jimmy might have it because I think he was going to make a slide from it. And then after he did that, he took a group of APVA over to see the graves. Chapter 1929, chapter. We are so anxious to mark the graves of the French soldiers buried at Kingsville near Hampden, Sydney, and restore the French's church. But this is a huge undertaking for one chapter. We want to arouse people's interest and get aid from the state and the national organizations. These French soldiers died for the liberty of America, not for Virginia, not for Prince Edward County. All right, this is really my favorite. 1929, they had a rough year. And then at the end of it, they say this. One of the bright spots in this year was decorating the graves of the French soldiers belonging to Rochambeau's troops. Members of the chapter held a memorial service at this sacred shrine on Memorial Day. So, this keeps us going because DAR members aren't frivolous. And this is, if they saw this and reported it and their feet and eyes were on the ground, we want to do everything that we can to follow it up for them. But also, I want to thank Dr. Pearson for also helping us. We have been traipsing through the woods, and he's given us some very helpful maps. So, I will turn it over to Jimmy, and he will answer the question.
So that's kind of where I came into the picture, and like I said, that was like that's February or March, and we had a meeting planned here for February of this year. We got snowed out, and can't come into the train station. There's ice around, so we postponed it until tonight. At least we got good weather tonight. But let's see. The first thing I did was just kind of refresh that in the background. That's what it looks like in Kingsville today. This is a road coming out of Hampden, Sydney over to Kingsville. And Kingsville is always ahead of Farmville, so they got the first traffic circle.
So the mayor's been pushing it.
We thank Chris for that.
Keep it out there.
Yes.
So we think, I want to tell y'all right up front where we think the church is. So it's back over behind this little grocery store where this was the original Fish and Pig. This is where from used to be a little convenience store. I think it's called Tiger Inn at one point. But we think this road right here originally started straight on across and up through those woods, and the church was back in there. We'll have a better map in a minute here.
Is any of the remains of the church been found?
Yes, and I think I'll get to that in a second. Coming in from Farmville, this is what it looks like, and this would be the church would have been over in here. It's an Exxon station. It's been there forever, and the Fish and keep on down the road, you go to Keysville, or take a right that way, you go to Hampton, Sydney. I'm kind of laying out how it is. There's 3 villages kind of made up of, I call the triangle, local names. Prince Edward, the French's Church has several different names. It makes it confusing when you're researching. It was first known as Robin's Nest around the church area because there was so many trees and evidently robins in their nest. Then there was a store named French's Store. It later was known as French's Old Store. Then a man came along named King, and it changed to King's, and then eventually it came down to be Kingsville. So we were dealing with several different names and a lot of these different, research areas I looked at. But the name French's has nothing to do with the country of France. The name was taken from the last name of Mr. Andrew French. The man Andrew French was not a Frenchman, and he was not a soldier. He was an early Scottish merchant and ran French's Store. Many local settlers were Scottish, and a lot of the people out in that area for years have had the name like McKay, McAllister, everything started with MC. So there's a lot of people out there that are descendants of early people. Also, the taverns in Kingsville, they had several different names, which also made it a little hard to follow. But anyway, so up in here we had the college area. Over here we had the county seat and worship. And then Kingsville seemed to have the business and the industrial area. And I will tell you about some of the businesses and industries there. First we'll talk about way back, there were no railroads out there, and of course no river out there. And everybody that came on stagecoach or horseback or horse and buggy. So Kingsville was very important because it was a stagecoach stop, and the taverns were located there. And as you can see, Farmville would be where this yellow mark is. The stagecoach coming out of Washington, D.C. was headed this way going to Georgia. And the closest first stop here in this area was Raines, which we now call Raines Tavern. And Raines was a fairly prosperous little town. They had the taverns and hotels and things there and stores. There's nothing really there anymore but the sign, I guess you'd say. And then the stagecoaches seemed to go about 10 miles every time they went about 10 miles. They had to stop and let the horses get water and people get off, I guess, and go to the bathroom or take a drink or something. But the next stop was Abilene. So Kingsville was kind of the major town in that area. So they came in on stagecoach. A lot of people came and they spent the night there in Kingsville and then went on their way the next day. A lot of famous people came to Kingsville. Charles, was it George Washington, Patrick Henry, all the dignitaries. Kingsville was the place. And the taverns, I think, also had ways to spend the night if you wanted to. They might have laid over there.
They report to the college students.
Yeah. Kingsville, talking about that area way back, Kingsville had just a few houses today, a deserted chicken hatchery and a filling station. On a bend in the road near Hampton, Sydney, it seemed unaware of any world outside, just squats among the trees like some old person intended in dreams. And there are dreams aplenty. They go back to Andrew French, a Scotchman who owned large lands and a store there. He gave the place the name French's. There was a tavern, a regular stop of stages on the way to Georgia. lights, entertainment. There's also a silk mill there between Worsham and Sydney. Saddle and harness factories, tannery, piano factory, which I'm told was behind the current day Exxon station, and many residents offering all the graces and charms of the best colonial Virginia tradition. On court days, of course, when you had to go to court or do anything with the courthouse, you went in to Worsham 1 mile down the street. On court days, King's Tavern was overrun with horse traders, lawyers, orators. Maybe he bunched them all together, I don't know. This too was a relay house for stagecoach passengers. Every 10 miles was a post station. Stopped at Rains, Kingsville, and then Midway near the county line of Abilene were post stations. Kingsville was on the direct stage line from Washington, D.C. to Milledge, Georgia. At the post station were relayed horses, patches, and horses were fed. Fresh horses were put to the stagecoach. So, there, like we mentioned, there were taverns. And what I could learn from Ray Gaskins, the taverns were here where the Exxon station were, and taverns over here where this big stucco house is now. Is that what y'all had, Charles? You think that's right?
Yeah, that was King's Tavern on the south side, and Turner, I think it
Yes.
was Turner on the one in the 1820s.
Okay. And as you can see, that this is the road coming in from Hamden, Sydney, and we think the church would go in this area, and I'll show you a better map in a minute. So the names are Turner's Tavern, King's Tavern, and Stevens Tavern, I guess. There were 2 taverns at Kingsville, Stevens and King's. They stood opposite each other. King's was the most patronized at commencement times and at the intermediate celebration of the philanthropic and union societies on each February 22nd. King's Tavern was crowded with visitors from the surrounding counties. From Richmond, Petersburg, and Lynchburg, they came on the stagecoach, carriages, buggies, and the horseback. It took many candles at such time to light up the tavern. So, what I'm saying is, Kingsville, it's hard to believe looking at it today, but that was the place back in the day. So was Worsham. I was lucky enough to get this good picture, and what I kind of started doing to start with was, I said I've got to get out there and read those highway markers because there's going to be some good information there. We've already talked about this slide, true or false. When I first started, I said, man, was there ever a church? What was the location? Is there a graveyard with any graves? What became of the church and the graves? And what was recorded about this subject in local newspapers and history books? So that's where I launched, seeing what I find out about the actual church and the graves. First, I had to figure out, well, when was the church built? There's several different times, from 1757 in some places, but I think it was 1764 before they actually got it built and started having services at French's. The Revolutionary War was starting about 1775, and it ended down in Yorktown, Virginia, about 1781. And according to what I found, Hampden-Sydney College later came and moved the church in 1784 over to Hampden-Sydney, probably in pieces, is what I assume. You think that's right, Charles? It took a car to move it. The church was started before the war and came to an end with the end of the war. What happened when England surrendered to what is now the United States, the church was no longer property of England, it became property of the state of, I guess, Virginia. And the land became part of Virginia's property, I would say. What do they call it? Escalated land?
It's huge.
Escalated land. key, I was able to get some maps showing exactly where. This picture was taken before the circle got built there. But we think it's right back here. That road had gone right back in, way back in those woods. I guess I've been working on this for 2 months, and I went out to Merck's one night, supper, and we ran into a lady that my wife knew pretty good, and she was married to Mr. John Rogers, no, Grant. She's married to one of the Rogers that lived right there beside that little grocery store. She told me that her husband and his father and his grandfather, and I don't know how far back went, but everybody in the Rogers family owned that property there, ran that little grocery store and the fish and pig area, and they owned way back. So she told me that at one point, the Rogers property had the church on it, or bordered the church area. And she told me, yes, Jimmy, I know exactly where it is. It's kind of overgrown, but I'll take you back there one day and show you exactly where it is. Well, we were at the cash register blocking up everything at Merck, so I thought I'd get back to you. I guess in less than a week after that, I heard she was taken sick. And that was the Easter weekend a year ago. She lived till Halloween almost, and she died, and I never got to talk to her again or go with her back to the site. So that was that. But then I ran across the information Charles had, so we know where it is. Ms. Rogers' family lived all in here, and this I guess is her house. There's a sign right there, and it's a highway marker, and that was in her yard. So Charles had come up with this map. This is Farmville up here in Keysville, Worsham down this way. So you come around here, and the Exxon station is all here. This road takes you to the end of the city. So we think that road at one time probably went right on down through there, and the church is back here. And there appears to be a spring here called Robbins Spring, and it goes down like that and eventually probably goes into the Bush River. But that would be the church lot, and these cabins would have been here and here. So here it is overlaid over a current Google map, you might say. Exxon station there, that old stucco house on that corner. Of course, the traffic circle is there now. And you go right back there, and it's way back in the woods. I was thinking it was more around up here. It's where that lady led me to believe, but it's way on back there pretty far. And she told me that one time there was an old road that went around there, and it kind of looks like this might be the road right here. Probably came back out over here somewhere. Robbins Spring. So, anybody got any question on where it was? Yeah, none of us have been back there. Thomas hadn't.
We have.
Okay. Did you go all the way?
Margaret and I have gone, and
And did you,
we're hiking out. Looking at everything.
okay, did you actually see the foundation?
We didn't see a foundation, did we?
Well, it's awful overgrown. I drove back in there some, and it's a lot, it's really overgrown. Anyway, we know it's back there, that was the site, and the next thing I did was, like I said, check out all the highway markers, and there are plenty there. These three right here in the Worsham community, down by the old courthouse and clerk's office. And did a little research on these signs. We had a program here one night about highway markers in general in Virginia. And I learned that highway markers all have a number on them, and they're pamphlets. I have one on that tell in each area what the number is and where it's located in the numbers having worship in Kingsville run from 65 to 72. And I will go over one at a time with you, but what I wanted to tell you was, okay, we get back to the science and the glebe land on the church-related property. This was all new to me too. Found out an English church, which is what French's church was, that the preacher had, along with his church he tended to, there was land that the country of England provided for the church, and it was like for the preacher to live on it or other people associated with the church. They probably raised cows for milk and cattle and places where they raised gardens and so on. There was glebe property. There were several glebe properties that were like 300 acres each. And they were not right up against the church. They were scattered between French's church and worship. So I thought then, I said, I better learn about this glebe land because, they might not be buried right up at the church. It might be on another piece of church property. So I went to looking. I said, I need to find out where the preacher's house was. So we know the church is right up in this area right here. But the glebe land was between here and here, and now you found some over here. So in reading the road signs, I found out that church was up here. Down here was a sign that talked about Providence. That was the preacher's residence. And it said it was about a mile or two behind this worship grocery. So I started looking, and I said, now how in the hell am I going to find that place? And finally, on a map, I saw a sign that said Providence Airport. And I said, that's got to be it. So, this Sandra glebe land. It was there were 4 preachers at the church. The last one there when it was taken down was Archibald McRoberts. And he lived at the glebe land house, I guess you'd call it, known as Providence. So I was looking for where was Providence. So there's a sign. And then I had to find the sign for that, and I found I saw that airport thing. So I went on this site, and that's Worship Grocery, and it's 1.37 miles as a crow flies right back there. So the story goes that I narrowed it down to about right there, I think, is where the preacher lived. And Mr. G.T. Gillum had taken a picture of that in the 1970s, I believe it was. And went over and talked to Billy Colson over here. And he told me, yes, that house is there. And we figured out that he and I and all our friends used to go there to the house that's built there, adjoining that. We used to party and raise hell, and that old garden, and that old house was out back, and it was great to fall down. I said, well, hell, I know where that is. Probably went by and then took a leak. We were carrying on at that. But anyway, I said, here it is. And then Billy luckily had this picture. So that's what supposedly the preacher lived there. And even after the church closed down and was moved, Archibald stayed there for a good length of time. I don't know how long, but he wouldn't get out of the glebe house. I guess he had nowhere else to go. I don't know. But anyway, one of the signs at Worsham says how the name Providence came about was right towards the end of the war. Troops from, I guess it would be the French, Tarleton Grade, came through the area and they went to the major houses and they burned some of them. They stole their food, took their livestock, just raised hell with all of it. this house is said to be named Providence because Harlington and his men rode their horses through the house, plundered it, and then set it on fire. But after they left, a rainstorm came and put it out. And therefore, Archibald McRoberts supposedly named it Providence. I don't know whether that's true or not. Do you have a thought on that, Thomas? You want to share that?
Well, yeah, I find this interesting because in Burrell's,
Just that one thing.
yeah, no problem. It was in one of the Prince Edward, history of Prince Edward County. It was Archibald McRoberts, Reverend Archibald McRoberts sent a letter to his friend, Reverend Bo Jarrett, in 1780, July 13, 1780, which was a year before Tarleton's raid. And it was dated Providence, July 13, 1780. Back in those days, when they sent letters, they would always, in the date line, they would always put the location where they were writing from. So it was already called Providence back in 1780.
A year before Tarleton came, so probably the name Providence could, it's already had that name before Tarleton got there. So we kind of think the sign is, that little story might not be real.
That was either in Burrell's or Bradshaw's history of Prince Edward County.
But
But he had it well documented, and I even went out to his reference and actually looked at the original book. It was by a bishop, and it has the letter in it.
So that little part of the story might not be true, but it's a good little story.
It's a good story.
But anyway, yeah.
And that house you just showed, isn't that where David Wood's place is now?
Yes. The people that were living there when Billy and I used to go and party there, this fellow right here, Dave Wood. I met him back in the probably late 50s, early 60s. He was over on the grocery store, and he was my Nabisco cookie man. So that's how I hooked up with him. Then we went to JC's, and we all ran around together. We would go to his residence right there beside that house, Providence House, and party. And this is his son, Brett. And y'all probably, a lot of people probably know Brett. He was on the UPS truck here in Farmville for 30 or 40 years. He just retired. So that was the family that lived there. Dave just passed away a year or so ago, and that's his widow, and we understand she's still living there. But the Providence House, or whatever we want to call it, that is now not there. They tore it down when they built that airport there. Dave was an avid flyer, and so was his wife, and they built a nice airstrip there. So that's the story of the Cleveland House. Another sort of, one of the markers that I looked for, I couldn't find this sign. And I found out a year ago Christmas, our lights were knocked out. It was the coldest day of the year. And I found out that a lady went through that intersection where they were building the traffic circle. She lost control, and she hit that sign right there and knocked it down, and then drove on down the road and went and drove into a lake. But our power was off for 24 hours, and it just happened to be the coldest night of the year. Anyway, the highway department never put the sign back up. And Ray Gaskins has been asking, what's wrong with the highway department? Don't they believe that? Or what? Maybe they don't have the money to put it back up. But nobody knows why it's never been put up, back up, and nobody's talking. So you go there and look for that sign, it's no longer there. This is a sign that's also over on the side by the church. It was over on the Hampton Sydney side of the road. But it says the British cavalryman, Arlington riding through the house, camped here in 1781. In the same year, sick and wounded French soldiers were brought to this place from Yorktown. 70 of them are buried here, nearby this site, a colonial church of which Archibald McRoberts was a minister. Well, I also question, why, if these men were sick in Yorktown, why would they march them all the way to Kingsville? Or did they get sick after they got here? That's probably the case. And the sign does not have any mention of the word smallpox. It just says they were sick. So that's the story of that missing sign. My next thing was to look for local publications. I wanted to find that thing that said these graves are here, some solid proof. And I read and looked at everything. I had just done probably a year-long search on the Dunnington Mansion, which is very near French's Church. And this lady, Sally Bruce Dickinson, happened to live where the current day Dollar General is. You know where that new Dollar General was just built. She and her family had several generations that lived there. She had written a book about the Dunningtons and the Dunnington Mansion. And I found that her book, which Ruth copied from me, gave me a copy of it, it was more correct than anything any of the Dunnington family had told me. And this lady was she was a local historian. She and her sister both were school teachers, and she lived almost adjoining the church. The church would have been right there. The Dickerson property was right over here. You can see it on the map. Sally Bruce Dickerson comes from a large family in Kingsville. She grew up there. She became a school teacher and taught in Western Virginia. She later returned to Kingsville. She was college educated. She wrote books on the Confederate War, Poplar Hill, and the Dunningtons. She also wrote about Slade Hill, which was just below Worship. Her father had held local jobs, and he was the sheriff of Prince Edward County at that time. I read her book on the Dunningtons, found her information most correct. She also wrote articles for the Palmer newspaper, and her family ended up with an altar, which I'll show you a picture of, that came out of the church. Her family, she was considered the local historian at that time in that area. So here's an article that she had published in the Farmville Herald. I don't have it all because it's too much to read, but she basically detailed out the whole story, and it was believable because her family had an altar, and they lived right there at the church. There's the altar. There's nothing, and it's right inside the museum of hymns in the library. If you want to go look at it, right here. And there's a plaque that was on it. Now, her father and people in her family were postmasters there one time. Her daddy was a sheriff, like I said. Somebody in her family, maybe her grandfather, great-grandfather, was Judge Asa B. Dickerson. And he lived from let's see if we can get it a little closer. He was from 1816 to 1884. And he gifted the table to, of the altar to Hampton Sydney College, and it's still there. But what I'm getting at is these people were the prominent people of the time there. These people weren't just blowing smoke. They were people. So, and she says, and I'm sure it handed down through her generations of her parents and grandparents, but they firmly believed it was true. And they lived adjoining almost the church. Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities by Miss Sally Bruce Dickinson. She went on to write, and it's a lot to read. I won't read it all, but basically, she says it's so. And so I felt real good about finding that, and I said she knew all about the Dunningtons, and she was right on that. We've also researched Slate Hill, which is just down the road. Slate Hill and Dunnington Mansion were owned by the same family at one time, so she knew all about that. She wrote about her neighborhood and what she knew, and her people were upstanding citizens, so she was all in that the story was right. Dr. Eggleston over at the at Hampton College, he was a firm believer, and he wanted to know the truth, and he spent a lot of time proving it. We'll talk about what he and his group did while he was at Hampton, Sydney. But what I learned from this sign, this is the sign that's in Mrs. Rogers' front yard, and it's still there. You can't hardly see it, it's overgrown and it's real dirty. But it says, well, we've already kind of read what it says. Episcopal Church was built in 1757, which doesn't really jive with what all the history books said. History books said, I think, 1764. It formerly stood 1/8 of a mile east of Heermean behind Miss Rogers' house. According to tradition, they say, a detachment of Rochabon army wintered here after the Battle of Yorktown, and 70 French soldiers were buried in the churchyard. Francis Joseph, how do you say that? Tower, father of Dr. John Eden Tower, served in this unit as a surgeon. So this is where I started getting information about these two brothers who came along with the troops. And they were both doctors, and they were supposed to have been with the troop units that came to the area. So we'll talk about them in a moment too. They're all part of the story. So there, when I took these pictures, you can see what was going on. They were building traffic circles. But look where the sign is. But what I wanted to show, and I'll go back a little bit. Notice the sign does not have a number on it. So I asked around a little bit, and evidently everybody felt like this was not a state sign. That evidently the DAR.
No, it's not a state sign. I talked to the
Yeah.
highway department.
Yeah. So the DAR privately had
The
made.
county put it up.
Who
During
did?
the county put it up.
Okay, Prince Edward County.
During the anniversary?
Yeah, in 1954.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not a state sign, and that's why it's over on Ms. Rogers' property. So it's still up. When Ms. Rogers died, we don't know who's going to move in her house. I don't think anybody's in it now. I'm thinking if somebody dies in the house, they might take that sign down. We don't know. Probably
It's
not.
county property, isn't it?
Private property.
It's county property.
It doesn't look like it's on the right of way of,
But they installed it.
yeah, I don't know, but that's the,
Maybe the DAR might all go and slip it out one night. Before somebody gets it.
Oh, yeah.
a good project, or at least get it cleaned up. And the other thing is when it was originally set on the highway, it was turned where you could see it from either direction. And when I guess the traffic circle people moved it back further, they turned the sign down, with only one side showing. So DAR won't turn it, they'll go in. But I don't know who the house is owned by now. But anyway, there's a sign, it's good. There's a close-up of it, and that's Ms. Rocky's daughter. So here's the photograph. And this lady right here is Miss Bug. Can you know, here at the Historical Society, we've talked about the Bug family, I guess 10 times over the years. They were one of the prominent people in Farmville. At the time, probably a third of the population were kin to the Bugs. They had come over from England, brought 4 kids with them, and had 3 or 4 more after they got here. And they are all in married to all kind of people in the area. And even the descendants, still, a lot of them live up on First Avenue or High Street. All very prominent citizens of Farmville. And they also basically headed up the Episcopal Church up there in front of the Rotunda in Farmville High Street. So she was a prominent member of the DAR. They were close friends, evidently, with the Wall family, Barry Wall. Mr. Wall had owned the paper. This is his son, Bo Wall. He's a lawyer at the time. This is Dr. Molnar's son, who Molnar Music Hall over at Longwood's named after. This little girl right here was Lila Jane Hanbury, who I went to school with. And she was related to the Bugs. That's how she got in the picture. But what I'm getting at is, these people were not messing around. These were the prominent people of Farmville at the time, in 1954. And they were all in for this. They were believers. Barry Wall, Mr. Wall's wife, Ronald Earl, she was a prominent member of the DAR. And Mr. Wall ran approximately 24 stories about French's Church in the Farmville Herald. And we'll look at some of that in a moment. But there's a picture. I went to Clarence Bradshaw's book, and I did find this, which threw me a little bit. He says the French soldiers quartered at Charlotte Courthouse. He had sent to Kent. What they're talking about in this clip was when the soldiers were either Prince, we don't know whether they were in Prince Edward or Charlotte counties. Seems to be a debate. Wherever they were, they needed, I think it was 40 cattle they wanted to bring here, cut up and feed them. And they only were able to have enough money to buy 20, and then 10 of them, by the time they got here, they weren't even worth the hide. So they only ended up with like 10 good cattle to feed the troops with. But this throws a little light on it that maybe they were in Charlotte County. So I know could pin down whether they camped in Kingsville or Charlotte Courthouse. Different sources say different things. On this sign here, that should be probably 1764 there.
New York Times earlier, somebody sent them all over the state.
Okay. This is a sign that's in Miss Rogers' yard, and it says, Bradshaw writes that the troops were quartered in Charlotte County. Sign says they were quartered in Kingsville. So that's up for debate.
It's quite possible that they sent them all over the state.
Yes.
Here and there.
Yeah.
I think the group that went to Charlotte Courthouse kind of got sent there because they didn't speak anything. And they caused a big ruckus when they were there.
Okay.
Well,
And there were
yeah.
a couple hundred.
that is possible. I will tell you, I researched all the letters from General George Washington to Rochambeau and to General Choisy, who was in charge of the troops at Charlotte Courthouse. And General George Washington told Rochambeau, let me back up. General Greene was in South Carolina. He wrote a letter to Rochambeau asking Rochambeau's assistance to send some of his troops down south. Rochambeau said, look, I can't do that because General Washington, I take orders from him, and I can't just move my troops at willy-nilly. So he asked George Washington. Washington said, yes, you can send them to Charlotte Courthouse, but no further. And so the letter stated that Washington, Rochambeau, it's okay to send troops down to Charlotte Courthouse. All right. Rochambeau sent a legion called Lauzon's Legion, and this is to your point. Lauzon's Legion had a team, they sent roughly 600 men down there, all right? Lauzon's Legion is kind of funny because they were the misfits of Rochambeau's army. It was said that Rochambeau, the Lauzon's Legion made up 1/6 of Rochambeau's army, but gave him 2/3 of his province, right? And they were just raised hell, do all kinds of stuff, right? And he would have to pay every time they stole somebody's cow, stole somebody's, or whatever. Rochambeau would have to pay this stuff. So, you know, there is evidence, I mean, written evidence that they were in Charlotte Courthouse, right? There isn't any written evidence that I could find, and I just researched everything at the Library of Congress that I could find letter-wise, that they were in Kingsville. But these 600 men had horses. They were Husans or Husains or however you pronounce that. They were infantry, they had horses, and given the fact that they didn't like to behave, Charlotte Courthouse on the horse isn't that far to Kingsville, you know? So, but that's where I was able to find, and there is proof that, you know, from letters that they were sent to Charlotte Courthouse. Whether they stayed there, who knows, but it was only for 3 months.
That kind of settles that. It could have been in both places. And also, I believe you told me that not all the troops were actually French men, that was some mercenaries.
Right, Lauzon's Legion was a mercenary group. All right. So when the French sent troops to help us fight the American Revolution, a majority of them were mercenaries because the French had their own problems going on in France at the time. And so they wanted to keep their loyal troops, you know, the king, right? And so they would hire and pay these mercenaries to come fight over here. And Lauzon's Legion was just one of many, but they were the best fighters that Rochambeau had. I mean, they did a great job in Yorktown. And after the Battle of Yorktown, but it was discussed earlier, they spread the troops out around the Yorktown area, Williamsburg area, and they spread them all out because they were worried about the smallpox and all that, right? And they had regional hospitals. So when Rochambeau needed to send somebody to Charlotte Courthouse, they always kept Lauzon's Legion away from the rest of the army because the rest of the army couldn't stand it, right? So who did they send? Lauzon's Legion to Charlotte Courthouse. So that's how they got sent that way.
So that sheds some new light. So here in one of the, I guess this came out of one of the newspaper articles, the Frenches just back of John Rogers' residence, colonial church called Frenches, also known as the Middle Church. There were 3 churches in the county, so there was another church over at Sandy River that the English people set up. And there's another one over on Five Forks Road, I believe. So the one in Kingsville was called the Middle Church or French's Church. So that's where that came from. Although having detected from the Episcopal Church, this is talking about the preacher after the church closed down, he found it convenient to remain in the rectory known as Providence, a mile and a half east of Prince Edward Courthouse. For the glebe lands extended that distance with some skips in between. So that glebe land, there were different plots, but they basically went from the church all the way down to behind Washington Grocery area. When Thomas researched the Rogers family for me, and the Rogers go almost back, I guess, to the beginning of Kingsville. And that family was fairly prominent also, and many of the members there in that family, they kept handing their property down to the next generation. Two of the men in the Rogers family way back were postmasters. So they were people of prominence too. It's part of what Thomas did for me, and Branch Rogers, John Worsham Rogers, then Robert E. And John Edmonds is the one who lived most recently in that little house, and his second wife was Ruby M. And since we printed this, she's died, but that's the lady I talked to. And she assured me that that was church burial. How do I pronounce that name again?
It's Mattal.
Mattal.
I talked to David Krug, who is related to him,
Okay.
and he pronounced it.
Okay. I have a heck of a time with that. Anyway, the two brothers that came up from Yorktown supposedly with these troops were Francis Joseph and John Peter. It's a little confusing because the two of them both had the same last name, and both of them were supposedly doctors. Some places I found says they were the earliest doctors in Prince Edward County, so I don't know, but that's what the story goes. Francis Joseph had two sons. One was John Peter, and the other was two sons, John Peter, and the other one was Francis Joseph Jr. The reason, see, they all tied up with the soldier story, but also when the war was over, Hampden-Sydney College was interested in keeping Francis Joseph here near the college to be a doctor for the area. So they granted him some property. Is that right, Charles?
I don't know if they granted him property.
Sold him property.
The family had property along
Yeah.
Highway 15.
So that they had property, and he stayed around. The other brother, as far as I could tell, disappeared, went somewhere else. But then Francis Joseph had John Peter, and I'll tell you how he plays into it. Francis Joseph, and his son, he was father. Go back to another road sign. This sign is out there, and I'll show you where it is. Just west of this medical school, John Peter, the son, which became a branch of Randolph-Macon College in 1847. It was discontinued probably in 1881, 61, okay. Dr. Mayer, one of the leading surgeons of the day, practiced here until his death. I've been by that sign a million times. I never really looked at it. I don't think you did either, Chris.
It's located right on Tenured Branch.
Yes. Any branch runs behind.
He is credited with as the surgeon that invented the operation for the cleft palate
Yes.
and other operations.
So he father stayed, and then he had a son. His son grew up and built or started a medical school of some sort right between Hampden-Sydney and the church. And Hampden-Sydney has his medical tools there. There's his son. And they say he wore the hat all the time, and he was buried with it. That's what the lady at the museum told me. He died.
Dr. Ripley's, believe it or not,
Yeah.
he was buried with his hat on, and he didn't have
But
120 years.
I guess Ms. Wade also told me that he even went as far as Georgia. The family down there paid him $1,000 to come down and minister to somebody in his family.
Both generations have.
Can you imagine riding a stagecoach from Kingsville to Georgia?
Stop every 10 miles.
Yeah. But Hampden-Sydney has preserved a lot of the stuff there. There's more information on it. There he is. There's the sign. So that's the story of that sign. Here are the instruments that are on display at the museum at Hampden-Sydney. I don't know what all that is. It's like a scale, another way that Hamden Sidney was kind of involved with part of the story. So, going out of Kingsville, going down to Worsham down here, that sign is right there. And there's a closer up picture right there.
So Jim, will they say there's actually a structure up there west of that main medical school? That's right in your backyard.
Yeah, well,
His house was
Where
there,
did
and he
it
had
was
kind of a barn sort of thing at the side that had an operating theater.
they said the barn and the house both.
Oh, yeah?
And he was buried there originally, wasn't he?
Yes,
They moved his.
yes. His remains now are over in Hamden, Sydney, in the graveyard.
Right in the village.
So, back to my original question, is was there ever a church? I found out, yes it was. And then where it was, I found out it's behind the old Fish and Pig area. The answer came, one of my answers was answered by an article in the Farmwood Herald dated March 25th, 1932. And this was the 10th article that I had looked at that time. And they were actually, I found 24 articles, and they were published between 1903 and 2009. Both in the Farmwood Herald and Hamden Sydney College displayed a great interest in this subject. There's a paper that I included from the DAR, and it talks about marking the graves. And I believe that was 1929 when that was a part of it. In Article 10, March 25th, 1932, this was published that Dr. Eggleston, I guess, from Hamden City College sent over a group of boys, and they actually searched the church area for the, I guess, the foundation of the church, and they were looking for the graves. I'm sure Dr. Eggleston wanted to put a stop to all the wonder, and he wanted to find it and settle it once and for all. So this was 1932, because the DAR had been already interested in it before this, but this was the actual time that they went over. And evacuations occurred by a group of Hamden students at Kingsville last week resulted in the discovery of brickwork foundations thought to be those of the old colonial King's Church, at which Patrick Henry worshiped in the Reverend Archibald McRoberts, traditionally famous patriot and founder of Hamden, Sydney. Mr. McRoberts, when the church closed down, he became a Presbyterian and hooked up with Hamden, Sydney, and was on the original board of directors. Is that right?
Yes, but it was before the church closed down.
Okay.
Church didn't close down until it was taken over by the state.
Yes.
He was a traitor to the Episcopal Church way before that.
And he abandoned the Episcopal Church and joined up with Hamden Sydney College. So a lot of people involved with the college and this story. The little chapel known as French's Church measured 35 feet by 40 feet. It was revealed by the ground plan or the foundation, which is still there. And Mrs. Rogers told me when she went back there were bricks, part of a brick foundation still visible. And this was, 2 years ago or less. After the Revolution, the building itself was removed to Hamden, Sydney, a distance of 1 mile, and there was used as an assembly hall at the college. Somewhere I saw what the name of the building, that the building was used as White Hall. That's no longer on campus either. But foundations were unearthed in the course of evacuations made by a student volunteer, and showed, of course, working under the direction of college officials in an attempt to locate the graves of a troop of French soldiers believed to have been buried in the churchyard body servant to Dr. Francis Joseph Mitchell. The second grandson of the original immigrant was interested spectator, so he was there when they were digging around and was able to contribute valuable information as to the probable location of the graves.
When was this written?
Huh?
When was this written?
Martin 32.
Yeah, I'll show you on the next slide. Anyway, here are all the articles that were written. This one right here was written by Mr. Hart, who owned Marble Earl to start with. He died in 1921. So Mr. Wall didn't write the first article. Hart was, he wrote the first article, and then in 1921, the Wall family bought the rights to the Marble Earl after Mr. Hart died. It wasn't until 1926 that the first article was written. Then came 27, 27, 28, 28, 29, 31, 32, and I believe the article that I just read to you was article number 10, March 25th, 1932.
Written by Eggleston?
I don't know. I don't think it showed in that clip. We can go back and look at them. Doesn't say who wrote it.
No, I can tell you, the Palmer Herald and the Richmond Times-Dispatch
Both wrote that.
both wrote about it, but it was Dr. Epperson who organized the group to do the search. But Dr. Epperson didn't write the article. But, if I
Yes.
close right in.
Yes.
The very next month in April, the Richmond Times-Dispatch wrote an article, it was on April 3rd, okay? And it goes, if I just read what I wrote, it says, Richmond Times-Dispatch reports on a massive, this is April 3rd, 1932. Richmond Times-Dispatch reports on a massive effort involved in trying to identify the French soldiers' graves and their identity. Describes the effort as, quote, rapidly assuming proportions of the Lindbergh baby hunt, with many prominent volunteers joining the search, unquote. They had a special attaché named Warrington Dodson from the American Embassy in Paris looking in the French archives to see if they could identify any of the troops, any of the names that might be over there. And they did come up, they weren't able to identify any troops that was in Kingsville or in our area, but they did send a letter back questioning. They found something about, they had some missing soldiers at a place called Fort Bruce, but they didn't know where Fort Bruce was. And so that they were asking, Dr. Everson was asking, if anybody knows anything about Fort Bruce, please let us know. Well, they went to the U.S. State Department. They didn't know anything about Fort Bruce. Nobody knew what Fort Bruce was, never had heard of it in their lives. Come to find out, at that point, there was a Fort Bruce down near the Island of Bago, way down south, okay? And keep in mind, during this wartime, there was a lot of war in Caribbean as well going on, okay? In fact, when the French left here, they went down to Caribbean for war down there. So the bottom line is they still weren't able to come up with any names, but they had people in France researching their archives, trying to match up names with, missing people, dead people, but they couldn't find anything associated with Kingsville.
The question I have is, have you made out of this an article by Dr. Eggleston in 1928 or 29?
Yes.
Do you have that?
I'll have to see as we go along. I can't remember if I included it or not.
Can I tell you what's in it?
Yes.
It says very clearly that you can still see the graves of the soldiers. It's like he's looking at them. So I don't understand why a couple of years later they couldn't find them.
Okay, can I?
Yes, go ahead.
I agree with you. I'm confounded by that. But during my research, in 1927, okay, Dr. Eggleston produced a report 1926 year for the ABAP or ABPA.
Yeah, I know, part of that up on the screen there.
He was the chairman of the Landmark Committee, Dr. Edison. The Landmark Committee, as you know, the people responsible for, trying to put up landmarks where necessary. And he worked hand in hand with the American Revolution. In fact, he gave speeches, at luncheons with the American Revolution Day. But he wrote his annual report to the Landmark Committee and gave it to the region. And that report was written in the Farmville Herald on March 1927. Okay, and in it, Dr. Erickson, my hat's off to that man, because he was telling the people, I know you want, this can't be rushed. We've got to really do the research and the due diligence and make sure we get history correct. But in that report, he talks about the campgrounds, not the graves or anything, but he talks about the campgrounds. In fact, it's called camping grounds in some of the Shambo shoots after the Yorktown surrender. That's the Kingsville area. The report that Dr. Edison wrote that was printed in the Farmville Herald, it got a lot of public attention, so much so they Farmville Herald would print it and sell those pamphlets in an effort, I believe, to help the ABAP make some money so they could help, get these monuments, right? And so it was always referred to as the camping grounds of Rochambeau's troops. Always referred, even in 1903 when it was the first article was written, as Jimmy showed, in 1903, Farmville Herald, it had it as French troops, quote, camped on the glebe lands in St. Patrick's Parish in the worship, which French's Church is part of St. Patrick's Parish. But it was always referred to as camping grounds. It wasn't until in 1928, the Landmark Committee, the ABAP, invited people from Richmond, their sister ABAP people, to come and take a tour of Prince Edward County. Part of that tour was to be the Kingsville area, all right? And the person giving that tour was Dr. Edison, all right? In the newspapers, the Farmville Herald and the Richmond Times-Dispatch, before the tour, they referred to it again as camping grounds for Rochambeau's troops. A week later, after the tour, both newspapers then referred to it, it referred to it as, okay, here it is. At the close of the Revolution, the body of French troops encamped at Kingsville, and tradition states that 70 of them died of smallpox. The church being used as a hospital, the graves of these soldiers can still be seen in the old fields. And that came from Dr. Edison, right? That was in February 1928. So something changed from when they gave the tour until a few months later, and all of a sudden it's no longer camping grounds. It's where French troops are buried, right? I don't know what changed, right? But something changed, and that was the first time ever that I could find any documentation ever that it was documented that one, there's 70 troops that died, and that they're buried. But where Dr. Eggleston and the Landmark Committee got the information, I reached out to him, and asked if they had any documents that Dr. Eggleston may have had left behind as part of this landmark committee, and they don't have that. research, when I couldn't find anything to match up where the French, and I read French books, French documents, everything that I could find here, and I can never find where there were 70 troops missing. So the most I could ever find was 8 troops out of Laissance Legions missing, and 2 of them got executed for desertion. And even the French say that. So I don't know where they got the 70 from. So that's why I went back and I started looking at, okay, if I can't find out where 7 troops, who the 7 troops are, or can't find out, then let me find out where this all first started. The very first documentation I could find, and that was 1928. That was documented that there were actually troops buried instead of just encamped. Al Caperston and the ADAP found that, and I know that they interviewed a lot of people, a lot of local people do that. But what actual proof that they have other than the word of mouth, I don't know. I wish I did. I don't know.
Are you going to get her in the papers when we leave here?
Again, or actually, if you have an email address, I can email it.
I have.
Okay. I'll be happy to give you that.
Those people had smallpox. Is it reasonable to think that they may have cremated them, burned them, and covered them up?
Anything's possible.
Well, smallpox is different to
Seems to become private.
It's pretty serious.
Oh, I would think the French were not involved in cremation. Very comfortable. The smallpox.
The letter in Mrs. Luckabug's scrapbook, she was at the Inner Region,
Yes.
she wasn't at the time. It talks about that it was a mass grave. It was a big trench, put all the bodies in, and they burned them.
So when they laid the markers back then, they laid it on a mass grave instead of just.
That just talks about seeing the graves,
Right,
and this talks about one mass grave.
right.
I did find this too, which I included in the program from December of 1926, where Dr. Eggleston and his group, the ATVA, which is the Association for the Preservation of Virginia Antiquities, they were talking about graves then, and Sally B. Dickinson was part of that group too, and so they were working on it as far back as 1926. And going back to these, here are all the articles, and anybody wants to go back and read each and every one of them, or any of them particular, go to VirginiaChronicles.com, enter the date, type in the word French's Church, and it will take you right to that article online. So there are all the dates for you. You'll have that. It was just too many to copy and try to put them on the screen, but we have all the dates right there for you. And I gave Margaret a copy of it. So you'll have all that information for y'all's records from here on out. There's one that the APVA and Dr. Eggleston were involved in searching as far back as 1926. After researching and reading all those detailed Palm Pearl articles, I was convinced the story of French Church and the missing graves had to be true. After all these people for the past 100 years or longer, it couldn't be wrong, right? I mean, the walls, the bugs, it's in the paper 20-some times. Nobody was trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. These were prominent people, and I fell right in and said, they gotta be right. So I was, believing. But Then, I read the article in 2009, Ray Gaskins wrote it, November 13, 2009, and we all know Ray Gaskins. He is a detailed researcher. He's spoken many times. This was the first hint that I saw of anybody disagreeing with what everybody else in the area had said was true. And Ray, you see that big article that he wrote? This was November 09. There's pictures of all the signs. I got in touch with him. I talked to him. He came to my house one time. But in his in the last paragraph of that long article, he says there are no French troops buried in the churchyard at French's church. I was a little surprised at that, but you know Ray. I respect his research, and I don't know, but I mean he's entitled to his opinion. But that was the first thing in the fallen world that disagreed with everybody else. So next I contacted Charles here from mathematics, and he had also researched the subject. Richard and I were having supper one night, and he said, "What are you working on, Jimmy?" And I said, "French's Church program." He said, "You need to get up with Charles. He's got done it too." So I'll let Charles come up here and then talk. You want to do that, Charles?
Okay, I pretty much forgotten.
Yeah, what is it? Here, you want to come around and roll your...
Oh, you got my slide?
Yeah, just come right around here.
I don't need to say it. I'll just point out that I'm an adjunct professor at Hampton City, and I'm an archaeologist by trade. And in the summer of 2020, is that right? We want to take a 5-minute break. All right. I very quick. In summer of 2020 or 21? 21. Yvonne and Margaret contacted me and asked me if I knew anything about the French troops buried at Kingsville. And I knew absolutely nothing except hearing the story or reading it. I knew nothing about it. But they asked me if I could do some research and see what I could find out. And I think it was because you were going to change the sign or rededicate the sign, I believe is what the thing was. And I've done a lot as an archaeologist. I worked with a consulting firm for 30 years. And this is kind of the bread and butter of that word. You get an archaeological problem that may or may not be archaeological. This could be with the burials. You know how to approach it. You have to do, first of all, historical research. You've got to find original, accurate records. Oh, okay. I'll send you a copy of the paper, though. Where do I put this? So, what I did was, maybe you went and looked at the sign, I'm not sure. So I started with the information on the sign, and decided to look at two things. First of all, find out about Mettauer and Rochambeau's troops. Who was he? How did he get to be a surgeon with the French army? What was his story? The other aspect was there a church there? And at that same time, I was doing research on what's called the Esquived land to Hampton City. The Scottish mercantile firm called Buchanan and Company owned 400 acres, kind of centered in Kingsville, up and down 15. They had purchased it in 1755 and set up their mercantile business, mainly involved in buying tobacco from planters and selling stuff in the store, which became called French's Store because men who worked for them. Some of them were two brothers named French. So I wanted to find out where the church was, history of the church and the history of Mettauer and the French troops. And we went out there in June of 2021, and we were about 8 or 900 feet north of the church because we had access to that property. Shelby, owned that, there she is there on the left, owned that property, and I said, do you know anything about the French church there? And she said, I've heard stories about it. And I said, is there a spring in your property? She said, yeah, there's a very large spring in the back of our property. And so we went out there, but it was overgrown in June, ticks, flies, bugs, and everything. We looked around there a little bit, but I had done that mosquitoed land map and found the location of the church. Oh, well, here we go. I don't need to say it. Here's what I was looking at. Relying only on that historical marker to start off with. Jimmy's talked about this. Church was authorized in 1761. It stood until 1784, and I think it took a year, 84, 85. It's actually mentioned in the trustee minutes that they got the church and moved it. Because Hampton-Sydney acquired that 400 acres that had belonged to Buchanan and Company, donated to them by the state of Virginia, because it was taken from Buchanan Company, seized after the Revolution, because they were British subjects, and they were considered, the term they use, maybe aliens, non-Americans. So the state took a lot of property from people, including this, and then they used it for some things. They donated to various entities. They sold some. Well, this they gave it to Hampton-Sydney in 1784, and it had the church on it. They leased the property for 3 years after they received it in 1784 to Nathaniel Venable. He apparently aided in moving the church. He may have, I read a story by, that someone said part of the church was moved somewhere near Worsham and built it and turned into a barn. I don't know if that's true or not. Bradshaw mentions that, but he says that a friend of his told him the story of someone who told him this story. That when they were riding out of Worsham, they saw a building. He said, it looks like a church, but it's a barn. He said, well, it was the old church. Nathaniel Venable moved it down here. These sort of stories come up. Well, anyway, I was doing the Askeated land study, and I said, yeah, I'll go look. I think I know where the church is. And I found that in 1825, 1833, and 1836, Hampton-Sydney had all that land surveyed. And on it is, as Jimmy showed a better slide, the church lot in Robin Springs. Well, we all know that's where the church was built, at Robin Springs. And you can see it was kind of directly behind the Fish and Pig. Well, we didn't get to it quite yet.
It might be another slide better.
Oh, okay, there it is. See, I've forgotten all this stuff already. So anyway, we know it was there. We know the church was there. There's just too much evidence that it stood. There's no doubt about it. Here's the slide Jimmy showed earlier.
That's something that Brady asked.
Oh, okay. So we know the church is there. Were the French troops there, and who was Francis Joseph Mettauer? Everybody says he was a surgeon for the French army in Yorktown. I contacted Yorktown Park. I contacted Bob Siegel. I think he was mentioned on one of your slides earlier. Considered one of the foremost historians on French military activity in Virginia. Nobody can find any record that Francis Joseph Mettauer was ever attached to the French army anywhere in the world. He was not at Yorktown. It's just as simple as that. He did show up he doesn't appear in Prince Edward County He doesn't show up in the 1782 property tax list. Well, this was after the Revolution, and he's not even in the county as far as we know. If he was, he was not. He may have been living with someone. The earliest record in the county is a 1784 deed. And then after that, there's a pretty good trail of information. And he was a physician. He had the two sons, one of which John Peter became a famous surgeon associated with Hampton City, etc. So Metcalfe was a physician, but there is no evidence anywhere that he was associated with the French army.
Well, there is.
Jimmy saw it. I thought it was going to be in the program, so yes.
Where was it?
Well, a friend of mine who lives in France found went to the archives of Alsace. And it does have his name, and it says surgeon in French, and it said with the army of, it was Lafayette or Rochambeau. And it might be on my phone, but if it's not, I don't.
Well, I'd be interested. I mean, Alms is that
She found it. We were
Right.
amazed. We were shocked.
I found it online. It was a genealogy for the Mattal family, and it listed him all in French, so I could only imagine what it said, but it listed him as a surgeon for the army in Farmville.
Yes, and I was with my friend from communication right now. You're thinking it's fake.
No, I'm not saying it's, he was a surgeon in Farmville, there's no, in
No,
Prince
it
Edward
said
County.
this listed one of the generals. And so my friend in France, and I was with him there when he did it, he called the people and asked if this was a fake. And they said, of course not. Why would it be fake?
Well,
I did.
Yeah.
why doesn't he appear in French military records?
He probably didn't come over with, in fact, when you gave us our talk, you said he was first mentioned in Maryland.
There was a Metiar in
So
Maryland.
he didn't come
Yeah.
with the troops. He came.
Okay, so he was definitely a surgeon when he shows up in Prince Edward County in 1784. There's no doubt about that. And but I couldn't find any record that he was with the French troops at Yorktown. So you may be right. Maybe he's somewhere else.
Aside from the genealogy of his.
All right. Well, that may be
his
true.
county
And I was
priest.
kind of thinking that maybe if there was no record of him being in the service, he was a personal physician who traveled with one of the officers
He may have. That's fine.
and ended up here.
I know he was a surgeon when he arrived in Prince Edward County, but the earliest evidence we have for him in the county is post-Revolutionary War. I mean, there are tax lists which are relatively complete.
But it would have been post-Revolutionary War for all of them. The soldiers included. And I also read somewhere that they weren't sent here because they were sick. There were like different groups of them. This group was en route to go to Norfolk to go where they sent them next. And then they got sick.
Well, that's possible. I'm just saying that the records that I looked at and found, and talking to the individual who is considered sort of a leading authority on French troops in Virginia during the Revolution, said he had never located, and in fact he sent me all the documents in French with the translation. These are records of units of Rochambeau, and they even list all of the medical staff at Yorktown in the French Army. And there is no Met Tower in there. So if he was with the French Army, which he may have been, it was not at Yorktown. Based on the evidence.
According to his parish priest, he was.
Well, possibly. Here's an example. Noel Fisher, he was a physician in Prince Edward County. Some of the only reliable information, other than some mentions and some diaries and stuff, medical stuff, he was involved in, I won't go into a very sordid divorce with his wife. He and his brother were living in Prince Edward County in 1790s, certainly living together. He had to go back to France. He had married Jemima Goldberg. He went back to France, was there a year, and he came back, and his wife was 6 months pregnant. And she'd been living with his brother. His brother immediately left. So for years he tried to get a divorce. So here's an example. Joseph Nettauer trying to get a divorce. Because you couldn't just get, you had the general assembly had to approve a divorce in those days. And they wouldn't approve it. In part because, well, she did not have a very good reputation. He had already had one son by so both of his sons were born.
Was she a Gaulding from Charlotte County? Or was she?
I didn't work.
Is that a Charlotte County name, Gaulding?
Some of our folks in Charlotte
He said he wanted a divorce because she was living a desolate life. But anyway, they wanted him to stay here, the locals, and here's a whole bunch of people signed petitions, including Peter Francisco, of course, which is a famous Revolutionary War person. This is just an image of that. And really the only documents in the Library of Virginia, original documents related to Nettauer, 99% of them are related to these divorce proceedings. And they're still there, the original, that's from the original. Because he was one of the few doctors in the county. Maybe the only one for a while, I'm not sure, but he was certainly well liked. Here's all the people who signed it. I mean, Woodson's, Holcomb's, Venables, Florney's, all kind of folks.
Big names in the county.
Yeah, and they wanted him to stay. He said he threatened to leave the county if he didn't get his divorce.
So Beverly Randolph's the first one up there.
Yeah.
They became governor.
And this is the image of the original document too. They had it on. And that's what I was attempting to look original documents. And we've already talked about John Peter, wasn't his son. Was he a surgeon? We just went over this. I could find no record that he was. Were French soldiers married? What do we know? Comes exclusively from family stories and traditions and newspaper articles. I contacted, like I said, the museum in Yorktown. They had no record of it. And Jimmy's pretty much been over this. We just couldn't find any. I couldn't find any records. Thomas talked about and Jimmy both talked about the newspaper articles. This is the very first one I found. I think it's the one you found too. It's a 1903 Farmville Herald article, and it specifically states the French settlers moved to the county and were quartered on the church's glebe land. Not at the church, had nothing to do with the church itself. The glebe land was south of there and down there at Worsham. But it makes no mention of diseases or anybody dying. It's just said they were quartered there. That's the first mention of French troops in the county, the local leaders. And in 1912, Morrison published this in which one of those books was it, Richard? This is biographical dictionary or whatever. And it says it's supposed that 70 of them dying of smallpox are buried in the churchyard. That's the first mention I could find of troops buried in the churchyard. And over the next 15 years, there was a great deal of interest in it. Jimmy's been through this. Dr. Eggleston got interested in it. He got the War Department to look it up, do research, prominent citizens in Richmond, some of the prominent citizens associated with Williamsburg did research on it.
Do you have a copy of it?
one of Morrison has written a couple books on Hampton, several books on Hampton City and articles. Which one that was? I may have to just sit down.
That's okay.
I just made some quick notes.
I'll get off on
So anyway, all of these articles talk about local tradition and local stories and statements. I haven't seen a single newspaper article that said, I have in front of me a 1780 or 90 French record showing that burials occurred in Kingston. By the lake, we've already been through this, and Eggleston organized a search for the church and the burials. They didn't find, they specifically say they found no evidence of burials, but they did find what they thought was the foundation, brick foundation of the church behind the Rogers property. So, we know the church was there, there's no doubt about it.
What was the proximity of the church to the spring? Is it within 50 yards?
Well, supposedly, the spring was on the church lot.
Okay.
So what we have a lot drawn out there, and the map that was surveyed shows the spring a little, I think I could go back and look at it, but it was within the lot.
Most of these old churches that I have found have a spring close by because the horses like water.
Right. And I'm sure there's a deed for that lot. I just never had a look for it. It would be from Buchanan and Company to, I don't know, the vestry of the church. I'm not sure. I just never looked for it. But it'll be there and describe it. But we know it was surveyed in 1825 and they recognized it as the church lot. And the spring was there. They draw it on the 1825 map. Okay, anyway, several articles, they found the church foundations, but no burials. It mentions specifically there were no burials. Well, here's the same church. You see Robin Springs, that's where it shows it on the map. The church lot. And so I've got a scale, and there's 1,000 feet. I've got a scale on this so you could find the spring. But Shelby knew the spring was back there. But we were, I don't have a pointer, but if you see the road that runs into the church lot, right where it meets the church lot, just north of it is a little cleared land, and we were in those woods right there. We were close, but no cigar. Now, in 2005 or 6, I believe, Dr. John Brinkley at Hampton City College has written an excellent history of the college. For some reason, gave the Virginia Department of Historic Resources, is that what it's called? DHR, yeah. He said the French are buried here. Now, I don't know where John Brinkley got this information. He knew it was somewhere in that area, but that property was not even, it's quite a ways from the church lot. He just gave them a convenient location, I think. But I don't know why. They may have asked him about it. They just said they had this record from him. Now, didn't you get together with some people from the
Yes,
Historic Resources?
Yvonne, I contacted the highway department to find out where they got their information for the sign. And they gave me Dr. Brinkley's information and then referred us to an archaeologist that Yvonne contacted and
Right.
got her to come out, and she walked over the property with us. She
Right.
said there's no burials there.
Well, I don't think that, because it was not, we know who owned that lot.
Yeah.
It was one of the Kings, I believe, that they bought.
That yellow spot next to it, Dollar General is, right?
No,
The dollar
it's
just
more
north,
than-
just above it.
Could I ask a question, please?
Yeah.
Regarding the Legion, what nationality were the members of the Legion? You said they were mercenaries, but were they French citizens or were they
No.
from other countries?
In fact, Laissance Legions was like 60% German.
So, what is the likelihood that the French were not overly concerned about German mercenaries, and the records for that particular Legion unit are not very accurate or not as extensive as for French citizens that may have been fighting.
They were still answerable to General Rochambeau.
Sure.
And Rochambeau was responsible for all of them.
Right.
Regardless whether they're German or what nationality they were. But, I mean, it's a good question. How good is their record keeping back then? I don't.
It varied, but
Yeah.
we do know that in that Legion, there's there are medical records and death records that give the number of soldiers who died in Charlotte County. 6 or
And
7.
what they died from.
Right,
Yeah.
and in that information that Bob Seelig sent me, there actually is a sketch map drawn by either the someone in the French Legion or American forces of their encampment at Charlotte County. So you know, I don't even remember the name of the river. The river is drawn, it's very distinctive curve in the river, and they show the encampment. So you could find it if you wanted to. But I don't know if anyone has ever looked for it or ever seen this map. I'm assuming the map is accurate. It was made at the time they were there by, I don't know, a Frenchman or an American soldier made it or what.
In Charlotte Courthouse?
In Charlotte County.
County, yeah.
I don't know exactly where it was. It's near Charlotte Courthouse, but I don't think it was right in the town itself.
And that was the bivouac area for the Legion
Right.
headquarters.
600 or 700 men, I can't remember. It was
But
quite
all bivouacked there.
The exact numbers on
All bivouacked there, or were they, because of the lack of supplies, scattered out to other areas? For example, and is it possible, that's where Worsham comes in,
in Kansas.
as a smaller
Could very-
element, because they're living amongst the citizenry, and a lot of their supplies are having to come from the citizenry to spread them out.
Well, it's possible. They could have been encamped there for a while. But if 70 soldiers had died.
But you said earlier that the church was used as a hospital. So it seems
No, the church was, I don't know what the church was used for during the Revolution.
Oh, I thought one of
One of
the,
the sources stated in the tradition.
Somebody
One of them said
Okay, but if you look at the newspaper articles, like I say, they quote family stories. Everyone says, they told us, it is believed to be. And yeah, it's not, those sorts of stories are often right on the mark. Very, very true. Sometimes they're a little off center, there are things that are true and things aren't. And why did they all of a sudden start in 1903? Well, we do know one thing. In 1903, King's Tavern burned down. The house next to King's Tavern, and it's been cut partially by the traffic circle. I pulled a lot of artifacts out of the circle when they